Okay, welcome back. We are now on the strategy of the text insertion task. First of all, just to go back to the how to identify. Now, you probably already noticed that this one is incredibly easy to identify. That's because it will always have the black box and the letter A. It could have the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, but probably the letters A, B, C, D after the black box. So having to identify this task type is not really a major part of the strategy. So let's get into the strategy. Now, first of all, you have to be aware that you will need to be able to comprehend how pronouns are related to nouns and noun phrases. It won't be for every single task that you get of this type, but that's the most common way that you identify this task type. All right, so first of all, you have to read the full sentence that you are supposed to insert into the reading passage. That way you get an idea of the information in the sentence, and you get an idea of is it going to be at the beginning of the paragraph, or is it something which is going to be more in the middle or at the end? Now, this is how you do that. First of all, when you're reading it, you have to notice this, if the sentence makes sense on its own, or if there's some sort of information missing. Now, that information which is missing, it could be because it starts with a pronoun. Now, if it starts with a pronoun, it's almost never going to be at the very beginning. Sometimes with the different question types, and you'll see when we get to the examples, that the box is actually at the very beginning of the paragraph. Now, that doesn't happen every single time, but if it's at the beginning, then it certainly is not going to be starting with a pronoun. So you have to look to see if there's a pronoun in the sentence which is referring to something which is not in the same sentence. If that's the case, it's almost always going to be referring to something in a sentence before where the sentence goes. It could also be introducing some information, or it's giving more information about some information, which obviously has to go before it. So when you're looking for the information, which is when you're looking for potentially missing information, think about, is this beginning some information or the continuation of it? So you notice if the sentence is introducing any topics or subjects. In other words, describing it as the first time that they introduce something. This could be the first time they introduce a person's name. If they do, they will usually give the person's first and last name. And in all reading texts, usually the first time they mention someone, they give both the first and last name. And then afterwards, they just refer to that person by the last name. So you can look for that as an idea of where the sentence goes. You should also notice if the sentence contains any information about people or topics which are not introduced in the same sentence. In other words, they're talking about them in a sentence previously. Notice if the pronouns which refer to something unknown, as I mentioned up here, if the pronoun is not referring to something in the same sentence, it's almost always going to be referring to something in the sentence before. And then you simply just go through the reading passage to find the best place where the sentence would fit. And as a time saver, one of the easiest ways that you can do this question or this task type is if they use pronouns. That's really easy. Or if you see time expressions like before, after, at the same time, while, all of those time expressions will give you a great idea of where the sentence goes. So let's take a look at the quiz that you hopefully already did. Now, this first one here, and as I mentioned before, you will have a brief summary of the strategy on every one of our quiz pages. So the first one, the sentence is, Klimt's primary subject was the female body, and his works are marked by a frank eroticism. All right, so here they're using just the last name. So one of the quick time savers you can do here is scan for the person's first name. And here we say Gustav Klimt, okay? And here they're just referring to him as Klimt. So we know immediately it's not going to go there. So we only have 3 boxes to refer to now. Okay, so they talk about his primary subject, the female body, and marked by eroticism. Okay, so those are 3 of the topics that we need to find synonyms or something relating to that. So we quickly skim through the first sentence. Australian painter, prominent member of Vienna secession movement. Nothing in relation to what it says here. All right. In addition to his figurative works, including allegories and portraits, he also painted landscapes. Now, here we see the phrase "in addition to." Well, that's a good clue that there's some missing information right here. Because in addition to means that it has to be adding to something which was already talked about. Now, it can sometimes be referring to something after, but almost never. So let's look at the sentence again. Klimt's primary subject was the female body, and his works are marked by a frank eroticism. In addition to his figurative works, okay, now, perhaps you don't know much about art, but figurative is referring to the female body. That's why sometimes we say that a person has a nice figure. In other words, the shape of the body. So figurative works, in addition to his figurative works, referring to the female body. So this sentence is giving more information about this sentence. So we know without even reading any more that the sentence has to go there. Now, we could read further to try to find out if it fits in the other sentences, but this is the best place it's going to fit anyway because there is missing information right there. So we pick that one and move on. And as always, even if you get the answer right, it will give you more information as to why it was right. And here it's referring to the female body and the figurative works. All right, so on the next one here, the sentence says, Brown threw his empty pistol at one Mexican officer. All right, so assuming that this was the first question and you didn't know anything about the subject, Brown, obviously the color is not throwing a pistol, so this must be for referring to someone's last name. So from the last one, we mentioned that if the person's only the person's last name is mentioned, that means that they probably mentioned the person's first name beforehand. Now here we see Brown. Okay, they don't mention the person's first name. So this reading passage must not be at the beginning of this portion of the reading passage must not be at the beginning of the story. So that technique is not going to work here. So then we have to look at what's happening in the sentence. He threw his empty pistol. He grabbed a lance and used it to defend himself. All right, so there's 3 different actions going on. Basically, he was in some trouble and he was trying to protect himself. After soldiers lassoed him, Brown surrendered. Okay, so here we have something going on. He surrendered, but here he's fighting. Usually a person surrenders after they fight, but let's just check anyway. Brown was then brought back to the site of the ambush. And then he defended himself? Probably not. He recalled that one severely injured Texian, Joseph Carpenter, was lying begging for his life in the dirt. And then he fought, and they saw Mexican soldiers shoot him. Okay, so here it's saying that he surrendered, which means that he gave up. He stopped fighting. And then in none of these sentences does it mention anything about him escaping or breaking free. So we have to assume that he's not going to be throwing his pistol or grabbing a lance or defending himself after he surrendered. So even though we don't have the person's first name here, the only place it could fit is at the very beginning, because he's not going to do these things after he surrenders and is taken captive. So we have to just assume that it's letter A. Like I said, they didn't mention the person's first name, but this portion of the reading passage is not the beginning of the story. So check that one. And sure enough, as it says here, after the person is lassoed and captured, he's not going to be fighting back. So on to the next one. All right, here it says, camping Khmer Rouge forces used whatever wood remained in the building structures for firewood, and a shootout between Khmer Rouge and Vietnamese forces put a few bullet holes in a bas-relief. Okay, so here we have Khmer Rouge. That's a group of people. We have the Vietnamese. There was a shootout, and there was bullet holes in a bas-relief. Now, here they use the adjective camping Khmer Rouge. It could be that this is the first time they mention this, but since they're using an adjective to describe the Khmer Rouge, then it's likely that they have mentioned them before. So one of the quick things that we can do here is to scan for the word Khmer Rouge. But another good technique when you are just looking at this and there's not really any indication that this goes at the beginning, it could. So this, we have to go back to the beginning and kind of skim while you're scanning. So we're looking for Khmer Rouge. All right, 20th century, considerable restoration, Angkor Wat, teams of laborers, archaeologists push back jungle, permitting sun to dark corners of the temple. Okay, so there's nothing in this first sentence that relates to here, so we know it's not going to go there. Work was interrupted by Cambodian civil war and Khmer Rouge control. Okay, here we see Khmer Rouge. Now, here, there's no adjective to describe which types of Khmer Rouge, so we know that the sentence is not going to go there. It has to go after this sentence. All right, and then it says, relatively little damage was done during this period. Okay, far more damage was done after the wars. Now here, this is an example of one where if you were reading the reading passage without the box, and it says relatively little damage was done during this period, far more damage was done after the wars. It almost seems like there isn't any missing information, but here we have little damage, here we have more damage. Well, let's see. Bullet holes in a bas relief is referring to some kind of damage. All right, so here they're introducing the topic of damage, and then they give an example of it, but then they talk more. Far more damage was done after. So C is the best option without even looking here. We don't even need to look at that one because that's the best option. And we check it, and sure enough, that's the correct answer. So that's basically an example of how you handle this type of task type. Looking for pronouns that are not referring to anything, looking at people's names, if it's looking for information that is the first time they've mentioned something, looking for things which are examples of other things. And basically, you have to look at the surrounding sentences to know where the correct answer goes. So that's pretty much it as far as how to handle this particular task type. Just follow the strategy. Remember the tips that we gave in this video, and you'll be doing just fine. So thanks for stopping by, and we will see you in the next lesson.